we'll get started, and I think others will continue to join us. But hello and welcome to the first virtual workshop of the Marymount University Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication, featuring Dr. Vani Henderson. The format today will be a moderated discussion, and we will be recording the workshop. We'd like to start out with welcomes and introductions. I'm Dr. Kimberly Meltzer. I'm a professor of communication at Marymount and the director of the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the proud co-director of the Marymount Copenhagen Center with my colleague, Dr. Melissa Harris, who would now like to say a few words of welcome.
Good afternoon and welcome to our very first workshop that we are hosting. We are so excited to have you here. Again, thank you, Dr. Henderson, for being with us today. Thank you for all of you who joined. We want to acknowledge all the wonderful people that we share with in the satellite campus organizations and the differences that we're making on our campuses. Again, I don't want to take any time from the speaker. I just want to say welcome and thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Metzler, for hosting today and putting this together. Thank you.
My pleasure, Dr. Harris, and I'm so excited to be working with you. We'd next like to introduce and thank Dr. Marnell Niles-Goins, Dean of the College of Sciences and Humanities at Marymount, Professor of Communication, also the second Vice President of the National Communication Association, and the immediate past President of the Western States Communication Association. So Dr. Niles-Goins, will you also please give a welcome and say hello?
Yes, I will. I would also say that I am a former past president of the Organization for Research on Women in Communication. So when the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center came, and I'm going to say Lillian and Lillian, hello to both of you. First, when we first met, this was a no-brainer for me, not just as the Dean of the College of Sciences and Humanities, but as a communication scholar and as a woman. So first, thank you for really spearheading this center on campus. Thank you to Dr. Kimberly Meltzer and Dr. Melissa Harris. But you have heard me already. For the rest of you, I want to give you a personal and warm welcome on behalf of the College of Sciences and Humanities, on behalf of our Associate Dean, Dr. Dale Orth, on behalf of our Provost, Dr. Hisham El-Rawini, and of course, on behalf of our president, Dr. Irma Becerra. We appreciate you coming. And Dr. Henderson, we are so excited to hear from you. I think sometimes our communication scholars are tired of hearing about us who are in academia and how wonderful academia is. So it's nice for someone who's actually an industry to come and give back to our students and our faculty. And for those of you who aren't associated directly with Marymount, the FIU Center and any other satellite centers for the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center, welcome. We look forward to working with you and also attending your events. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niles-Goins. We would like to thank our university president, Dr. Irma Becerra, for making the connection for us at Marymount with the Copenhagen Center at FIU. Thank you to Dr. Lillian Lodge Copenhagen, Lillian Abreu and Carla Zenson from the FIU Copenhagen Center for all of your help and support. We also want to recognize our colleagues at the other Copenhagen satellite centers at Rowan University, Julie Haynes, and Stevens College, Bethany Irons. We are thrilled to be part of the Copenhagen network and to be able to provide opportunities and resources to students and faculty on our campus and beyond. So now I would like to introduce our speaker to you with her talk entitled From the Inside, a Communication Researcher in Silicon Valley. I'm proud to introduce and welcome Dr. Vani Henderson. Vani is a user experience research leader at Google, currently heading up research for the content safety team. She's held a variety of roles at Google since joining in 2007, including on Google Maps, Identity, G+, and SMB services, and has managed both small and large research teams. She completed her Ph.D. at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in communication at Cornell University, and a dual degree in journalism and communication from Concordia University in Montreal. Prior to joining Google, Vani was a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Prevention Research Center, part of Stanford School of Medicine. She's also held research positions at ad agency FCB Healthcare and the Corporate Executive Board. She lives in Palo Alto, California, with her husband, 2 children, and a rotating pack of foster dogs. So, Vani, thank you so much for being here with us, and we're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me today, Kim and everybody else. And I'm really hoping that we could make this as interactive and casual as possible. I spend a lot of my time talking with folks in industry and not as much time as I would like talking with people in academia. And I love this opportunity to create more of a bridge between the industry world and the world of academia. Kim gave a nice little intro. I'll just pop up on the slide. Kim, would it be okay if I just talk through my background a little bit? Or do you want to talk through questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be ideal. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Let me go ahead and do that then. I'm just going to share my screen here. And since people on this call are clearly very interested in communication, I thought I would give you a little bit of color about how I went from undergrad in studying communication to where I am today. And I think if I think back to why I decided to study communication in the first place, I think I have to blame my mom, because she would tell me, like, don't watch so much TV, it rots the mind. And I wonder, does it really though? It doesn't really, I really want to understand a lot more about how communication works in the brain. So I started off thinking that maybe I would be a journalist, but it turned out that I really liked the communication piece, like understanding the psychology of how people consume media in particular. And that has really been a passion of mine. I am Canadian. I grew up in Montreal, Canada. And when I finished my bachelor's degree and had this passion around understanding communication and media effects, I wanted to pursue my graduate studies. So I headed down to Ithaca, New York, and studied risk and health communication at Cornell. After that degree, I had the opportunity to work in an ad agency in New York City. So I had these, I guess, Mad Men type dreams of what it might be like to be working on Madison Avenue in New York. And I worked at an agency that specialized in health and risk. So worked a lot in doing research with patients and doctors and nurses in order to inform ad campaigns for any kind of healthcare issue, you name it. I've worked on everything from birth control to HIV drugs to Parkinson's disease, and really became very interested in health. And at that point, I thought, no, I really, really like research. I want to go back to school again and do a PhD. And that's where I ran into Kim when we were both in graduate studies at the Annenberg School for Communication, which is a wonderful program. And my focus there was on health communication, very much at the intersection of media, health, and to some degree policy, and also with a focus on kids and teens. I went from that experience to thinking maybe I want to do academia. Let me dip my toe in the postdoc world. And I did that for a little bit, but I heard that this company, Google, was hiring PhDs. And thought, well, I'm not really a tech person. I'm not an engineer, but maybe they'll hire me. And lo and behold, they hired me as a researcher, over 15 years ago now. And I've been at Google ever since, doing different kinds of research roles, but most recently, for about 8 years or so, working on user experience research. So that's just a quick summary of how I've gotten from where I started to where I am today.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Vani. I think we would all be eager and excited to hear about your day-to-day work. What's that like? What do you actually do on a daily basis in your role?
Yeah, happy to share that. So maybe folks on the call are familiar with user experience, maybe not, but I'll just walk you through really briefly what it is to just ground the conversation. So one of the meta objectives of my role is to help make technology easier to use. So that is, I work with amazing engineers and product teams at Google, and they are technological experts, but they don't necessarily think about the angle of making the product easy for an average person. Maybe somebody whose first language isn't English or doesn't speak English at all. Maybe somebody who doesn't have the latest and greatest hardware. Maybe they're working on a really low-end Android device somewhere in the global south. So one of the things that I do is bringing user insights to the table to help shape how technology is used. User experience is also about the art and science behind making products that people love. And what I mean by this is we probably all have some product, whether it's an app or a piece of hardware, a piece of software that you just love using, that you're really happy using. And if you pause and think, like, why do I really like this particular product? So I used to work on Google Maps, for instance, and one of the things we'd hear all the time was, we love Google Maps. It gets me from A to B. It helps me predict where there might be traffic jams, if I might need to take an alternate route, if I need to leave work early to get home on time. And all those things are based on an understanding of how people use these products on a day-to-day basis, and what it takes to make a product really, really useful and delightful. And this all kind of boils down to how I spend my day. Just to bring this back to your question, Kim, my job is primarily understanding the people who use our products, really having empathy for them and their experiences, and hopefully solving their problems. Just to give a quick example, we were doing some maps research in India, because if you've been to India, if you've been to Delhi, for instance, you would know that the traffic is pretty atrocious. And one of the ways that people help themselves get around is they use two-wheelers. So basically, a lot of scooters are prevalent in India, not so much in the US. And amazingly, because a lot of the product teams are Western focused, they hadn't considered the needs of people who use these two-wheelers, these scooters, to get around town. And if you're using a two-wheeler, you have some advantages, right? You can go down these back alleys. There's certain roads that might be available to you. Well, that wasn't reflected in Google Maps at all. So by going to India, observing people on the street, how they got around, talking to them about pain points, we were able to pitch the idea that Google Maps should actually have an option for directions, not only for driving a regular car or public transportation, but also for scooters. And so we launched that in India with a lot of success, and then spread to other parts of Asia in particular, where two-wheeler transportation is pretty common.
So I think you started to touch on this, Vani, just now, but you have 3 communication degrees, right?
Gosh, that's a lot, huh?
Yeah.
Too many.
You know, undergrad, master's, and PhD. So one question I had was, how do you apply the knowledge and skills you gained through your communication education to your professional role? So you just alluded to some of that, that you had to go and actually observe people and talk with them. So in your role, you know, on a regular basis, what kinds of activities are you doing? Are you using different kinds of research methods that you had learned and practiced, all the way through school? Or can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. There's probably a couple of ways that I use what I've learned over my multiple degrees in communication. One is more the soft skills, and one is more hard skills. And when I say that, I mean more like the research expertise that you pick up in graduate school in particular. The soft skills of communication are extremely important in any organization, but maybe particularly important in a large, fast-moving company like a Google or any fill in the blank. So that's the ability to communicate well to large groups of people, to have smaller group conversations in an effective way, dispute resolution, conflict resolution. All those things are maybe not so explicitly taught necessarily in communications programs. I certainly didn't take a class myself in interpersonal communication, but by being in a department that values and understands the ability of people to connect through media, through face-to-face communication, really is so important to the work that I do, because I work with people with vastly different backgrounds from mine, and people all over the world. I work with people in offices in Japan, Australia, Zurich, all over the place. So being able to communicate effectively is important. In terms of the hard skills, I'm a researcher. I consider myself a researcher, and that's very much been the focus of my career since I started working full time. The skills that I use most are I do a lot of surveys, so being able to craft surveys to answer specific research questions, analyze survey data. And I also really enjoy qualitative research as well. So doing in-depth interviews, contextual interviews, meaning going to be with people in their space and observing and talking with people in their space. The research is, I think, so critical to building technology projects and products that really do meet the needs of end users.
Thank you so much. That answered some of the things I was wondering about. So can you tell us, in engaging in all of those activities, doing research with users, what have you discovered? What can you tell us about how we gain consumer trust, right? How do you gain consumer trust? And what are some of the most important factors in consumer trust? So I understand, you're trying to improve the user experience, but you also, I think part of your title, right, has been working with consumer trust. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, happy to do that. A little bit of context is, as you might have seen from other data, that trust in institutions, particularly in the US, has been on the decline, and institutions and government in particular has been declining. And even trust in companies, internet companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, has also been on the decline. So for people who work in technology companies, we've been thinking about, well, what are the trust drivers, and how do we help build trust in technology companies? There's research actually from the organizational behavior literature that suggests that trust is basically driven by two main components, and that's competence and warmth. Competence meaning, are you good at your job? Can you actually do what others are expecting you to do? And warmth meaning, Are you benevolent, compassionate? Do you seem to have the other entity's best interests at heart? And so when it comes to trust, I can't go into very much of the details about how Google's thinking about it, because it is confidential at a detailed level. But at a high level, some of the issues that we think a lot about are security. So are we keeping users' critical data safe? And Google's got an amazing track record of, for instance, not being hacked, and so on. And in terms of privacy, do people understand how their data is being collected, used? Do they have a sense that they have control over the data that's being collected? Google and other internet companies are always trying to improve the competence of what we do, i.e., to be really smart at understanding what a user's needs are, and giving an answer back that's relevant. So if you're a user of a search engine, for instance, if you type in a search query, chances are you're going to very quickly get back an answer that addresses the question that you have. And it's become just kind of like expected that you should be able to go online and search for something and find out whether you're searching on TikTok, which has become now like the search engine for Gen Zs. Like they really turn to TikTok for super interesting. But the expectation is that you'll just be able to get what you want. So we're always thinking about how to do better at our core job, but also how to show users that we really care about them and what's important to them, and to try to be as much as possible, let users know that we are putting we have their interests at heart very much.
Thank you. I was too bad you can't tell us the things we're not supposed to know, but but thank you for what you can tell us. We had a question in the chat that related to something we were talking about a few moments ago, when we were talking about the different types of research methods that you use in your job. So I don't know if Lillian, do you want to ask your question yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for joining us today. Question from our student base. What applications or softwares do you recommend for student researchers or academics who are interested in demonstrating their results in a more graphic and reader-friendly way?
Oh gosh, there's so many data visualization tools out there. If you're okay with using R has a lot of graphing tools. It's the default visualization isn't necessarily beautiful, but if you're able to put in a little bit more effort into customizing your graphs, R can provide some pretty good stuff.
Thank you.
So Vani, I was hoping you could tell us about some of the most important things you've learned about being a successful woman in your career. You're clearly very successful in the line of work that you do. What are some of the most important things that you've learned as a woman in communication in your field?
Yeah, such an important question. I think over the course of my career, the challenges have changed. Some things have gotten easier and some things have gotten harder. So for instance, when I started at Google 15 years ago, I had a child who was one, a little baby. My little baby just turned 17. And so one of the challenges that I faced was being a working mom in a 2-parent working family, when a lot of the people I worked with were men with stay-at-home wives, or maybe women who didn't have kids. And being somebody who really had to leave at 5 because I had to get daycare, do daycare pickup, that was something that I think I didn't even feel comfortable talking about that side of myself. Like I didn't want to acknowledge that I had this other life that was not a work life. I feel like today, and maybe even has been spurred on by the pandemic, there's much more recognition that people, women, have lives outside of their day jobs. And that might involve childcare. And there's more blending of work and home life compared to when I started today. So that just basically, like, being a working parent has very much shaped my experience as a woman in communication. Another thing that I would say is I don't know if this is specific to women in communication, but in general, women, and I would say this is something that I've done, tend not to put themselves forward as much as we probably should. So we tend to be very critical of our abilities. We might suffer from imposter syndrome. So feeling like, oh gosh, why am I here? Do I deserve to be here? And I feel imposter syndrome. It's something that I face, and I think it's pretty common for women. And it's something that I think you can kind of help try to create a community of supporters around you who can help be your supporter and talk through some of the challenges when you are feeling those moments of feeling like, gosh, maybe I'm not that awesome. Because women can be very, very self-critical, more than we need to be.
I think what you said resonates with a lot of the women here today. So thank you for sharing that. We have a few questions that are coming through the chat. So one from our dean, Dr. Niles Goins.
So I think that your experiences, Dr. Henderson, kind of will help you answer this question. And I'm thinking specifically from a maps perspective, like Google Maps, but you can definitely broaden your response. I think Google Maps, in terms of recognizing its users, has been really great. But I'm interested in how you make sense of the data that you come up with, especially since those who use Google Maps and other interfaces vary. So, for example, I use it very differently than my 84-year-old father, who calls me and maybe asks me how to use it. And then I'm, spending 20 minutes with him or my mother about, okay, this is how you do it. And maybe they want to take the bus because of traffic, and this is how you navigate. So thinking about all these diverse demographics, right? And in the US and outside the US, how do you make sense of what to prioritize, how to change it? And then even if to change it, because if you change anything, then everybody is mad because now we have to relearn it. So can you talk a little bit, and I know it can't be specific, but how you make a product for such a diverse group of people?
Yeah, it's a challenge. Thank you for the question. Such a good question. It's absolutely a challenge because our user base is incredibly diverse. I laughingly say, like, it's the world, just build something for the world, the population of everyone. It is not easy. We start though with trying to figure out what are core needs that would be universal for a wide set of people. So let's say for maps specifically, as an example, getting from A to B everybody wants to get there quickly and safely, and if possible, inexpensively. So regardless of whether you are in Copenhagen or New York City or Buenos Aires, chances are that you have those core needs. And we're very fortunate at Google that we have a lot of monetary support for research. So we can actually go out and do that kind of international research to do surveys or talk to people in all different corners of the world to really understand what their needs are. And we're not going to be able to cover every last user need. Like, for instance, if you're somebody who lives in the Andes and you're looking for trails that you could take your cattle up, well, we don't really have that yet. But we do try to cover, at least 80% of the user needs. And when it comes to research, we know that there's an inherent bias to thinking that our users are like us, and us meaning weird, right? Western, educated, mostly white, etc. So we try to include in our research a diverse set of users, and diversity might vary depending on what the product is. So for something like Google Maps, diversity might be the angle that might be important for diversity is rural versus city, the amount of congestion, the availability of public transportation or not, the prevalence of biking as a way to get around. So really talking to a wide set of people. And then you can only do so many things at the same time. So in terms of actually turning those insights into product, it's basically a prioritization. Like, we're going to work on first driving directions, because that's really common. And then biking directions might be a little further down the list because it's less common as a mode of transportation. And to your point about change of version, yes, we absolutely notice that whenever we change things, even if it's a change that we think is positive, and we've done a lot of research that we're pretty confident, we will get complaints like, why did you move this button, or why did you change this algorithm, and I hate you guys now. But it's pretty rare that the change of version is permanent, that we see users like really dislike it and never learn how to use it and leave. Pretty much we see a little blip and then things go back to normal when we change things, and hopefully they get better over time in terms of our usage numbers, engagement, happiness of our user base, etc.
It's fascinating. We have another question in the chat from Scott Taylor. Scott, if you're able, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, this is Dr. Taylor from Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri. And you work at Google. Google has its certification processes. And given the current state of employment, are we seeing a departure from the traditional educational platform and maybe a rise in the importance of certifications of essential skills to obtain entry-level employment? Are you seeing that shift? Or, I mean, there's a lot of other, besides Google, a lot of other large companies that offer certification processes. And are we moving in that direction, I guess is my question, especially since we're full of academia right here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't speak to it from a Google perspective. It's not an area that I work on, but especially as a parent of a college-bound senior in high school, I have been doing a lot of reading about college and higher education. And colleges are seeing a decline in people applying to college and college attendance. And one of the reasons is that these things like certifications that different companies, including Google, offer, they provide training and skills that somebody can apply very immediately in terms of getting a job at a much lower cost than a typical university or college education. Other reasons for a decline in college that I've read include more people just wanting to be entrepreneurs, whether that's starting a small business or even trying to be an influencer on YouTube or TikTok. That there's more people are seeing more ways other than getting a 4-year college degree to be able to make a living. So it's interesting shifts that I'm seeing. Would love to hear your perspective as well.
I don't know if others would like to offer their view or respond to that.
Actually, I had a follow-up question to Scott's question. So a big buzzword on campuses is upskilling, getting digital badges for students above and beyond their degrees. What would you recommend if a female student wanting to get into leadership positions and really trying to be perhaps maybe you? Her goal is having your position in the future. What do you recommend to a student like that? That's taking a communication degree and wants to work for Google and is determined to do so.
One thing that I recommend that students do is try to get work experience. So doing internships or some kind of relevant hands-on job where they can show their commitment to working in the field and get a sense of, do they actually like it or not? Because something that can seem really glamorous from the outside may seem less glamorous if you're actually in the role. So internships, really, really important. If you can set up a digital presence as well that showcases work you've done, whether it's your writing skills or video skills, or if you've done user research and it resulted in some change. It could even be, it doesn't have to be at a big company. It could even be in the context of helping your department fix their website and make it more usable. Having those examples and those case studies and a digital place where you can point people to that work would really be looked on very, very favorably by a lot of employers.
Thank you.
I don't know if others wanted to respond to or be part of the conversation about college degrees versus certifications, or we can move on. I know that those of us in academia, it's something we think about a good amount of time. Okay, well, so we can open things up. I always have more questions I can ask, and I think my colleague, Dr. Harris, my co-director, may have some questions, but let you finish the bite. But
you're good.
But if others have questions, we invite you at this time to ask those to Dr. Henderson.
I'm going to just jump in here. I love Lillian's question. I actually had that question written down. Just thinking ahead for students, because I know I went to Google for something that I was working on, a research project, and was completely mesmerized. And I was in my PhD program right there. So a lot of folks in the communication field are always looking to see what they can do, how they can jump into industry. And I think sometimes as academics, we forget that there's also another track, there's industry that sometimes people go into, you know what I'm saying? So then what I'm going to do is because Lillian asked that question, I'm going to pivot a little bit, because a lot of my research is around activism and work. And so I'm really interested in what you do, Dr. Henderson. So I was reading Algorithms of Oppression. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's by Safiya Noble. And so she talks about how those algorithms work when we're searching. And so I know as a researcher, what you offer Google in your experience in communication. How can you as a researcher help with activism and give voice to people who sometimes through technology are either muted or they are, or I don't want to say muted, but they're also not, they're profiled, right, within these algorithms when they're searching. So do you do anything within your research to kind of address those issues? And I know there's top secret stuff that you can't tell us, but it's really, really interesting. And so I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of that component as a researcher, how you can bring activism into what you do and giving voice to other people when you're working with the understanding communication.
Yeah, one of the things that Google in particular tries to do is trying to recruit a diverse workforce, because if we have a more diverse set of employees, particularly people who are working in product development, machine learning, they will point out things that a more stereotypical engineer may miss. A super simple example, just that I would call out. Google at one point had this fun little free drawing tool, ML, machine learning drawing tool online. I don't know if any of you ever played with it, but basically, like, it would give you a prompt to draw something, let's say a tree, and you would start drawing it, and then the machine learning side would guess what it is that you're drawing. Well, because the early data sets were created by men, when a prompt came up for shoe and a woman drew a high-heeled shoe, the computer didn't know what it was because it had been trained on sneakers. It only could recognize sneakers. And it's a super simple example, but just, I think, a very compelling example that you need to have diversity in the inputs because the machine learning algorithms are learning off those inputs. So it's absolutely critical for us to have people inside the company who are poking and being like, hey, what about this? Did you consider skin tone? Did you consider, fill in the blank, like any kind of angle on diversity that might be important. And then from the outside, I think holding companies like Google accountable if you see something that doesn't seem equitable, that doesn't seem fair, to flag it. There are actually ways of providing feedback in product, so that we can fix those things. I'm associated with a team that is working on more product inclusion in Google products, and that came from a lot of research, for instance, from let's say women who were using Google image search to look for makeup ideas, and you would type in whatever, like lipstick, great lipstick ideas, or great blush. And the results that would show up were all colors that were really great if you were white, and not so great if you were not white. And so Google actually partnered with an academic who has this thing called the Monk skin color scale. So it's basically has mapped skin colors onto a finite set of colors. And I don't think it's quite launched yet, but it has been announced, and that's why I can talk about it, that when you go into Google image search, you can actually pick your skin tone. And so if you search for makeup ideas, it'll find ideas that are good for the skin tone that you've identified, rather than just assuming that everybody is white and with colors for white females. So another simple example, but it's efforts to increase diversity and inclusion, and those ideas very much come from people working internally on the product. I don't think that the white males or Asian males who are primarily working on this product would really be thinking like, makeup ideas for diverse set of female users.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Vani, I think that's so interesting to hear about. It actually makes me think about a question that I know Dale has. So Dale, I think now probably would be the perfect time to ask your question. You know, when you're talking about if you do, it sounds to me like an advanced search. So I want to know, how do people know that they can do those kinds of searches? You know, are there filters? Do they go into advanced search and then do their search? So if you're running into those kinds of challenges, you know, when you're using different Google features, how do you as a user discover, right? If someone doesn't tell you, or, you know, eventually you figure it out on your own. So Dale, I thought maybe now you can ask.
Yeah, it's kind of connected to that, definitely. So thank you first, Dr. Henderson, for sharing your experiences with us. It's fascinating to me. I love how you described your job as understanding users and helping them solve problems with empathy. I think that there's a lot of job descriptions, and I like that. And as I visualize it in the way you're discussing it, or even in that example, it seems like you could spend a lot of the time and effort in changing the tool to be a better tool, or a simpler to use tool, or a more intuitive tool. And in that case, where they've input that information and then the result is better. Or it could be spent educating people how to use the actual tool, right? If there was a way of going in and if they just added something to their search term. And I'm wondering sort of how much effort gets put into those. Does most of it get used on improving the tool versus helping people learn how to use the tool as it already exists? Sort of effort maybe in your own scope of service, but also overall at Google.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the most successful products really look to themselves as the tool and how to fix the tool to make it more intuitive and easier to understand and self-correcting. So for instance, like spell correct in search, rather than just sort of telling people that, oh, hey, you can type in your search differently with different spellings and get different results. Google search just autocorrects your spelling if you spell something wrong. So, mostly people don't want to really learn how to use these tools. The onus is on the product itself and the people making the product to understand where users get stuck using the product and try as much as possible to make it intuitive, easy, self-correcting. Now, for people who would love to nerd out and learn how to use tools, definitely there are a lot of resources. Google has a help center, there's community boards within products. Not all products, but many. There's what we call tool tips, so little like things you can click on, usually a question mark or a light bulb that you can click on and learn more about how to use something. Or if you're just curious and somebody who likes to click on all parts of the UI, if you click on what we call the hamburger menu, which is like the 3 lines usually, or sometimes three dots usually in the upper left-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, you can find all sorts of settings and so on. But we've learned, I think, through trial and error that most people don't really want to be taught how to use a product. They just want it to work and just intuit what they need. So we really try to lean into that as much as possible, while still providing resources for people who like to go deep and really nerd out on those advanced features.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Right. All right.
I know we're running out of time, but I have just a quick question. I've been a dean for 3 years. Before that, I taught a lot in organizational communication. And I feel like 99% of my students after they graduated wanted to work at Google. So is it as fabulous as everyone thinks it is? And then if a student, for example, wanted to work specifically at Google, I know you mentioned having them do work experience during college, but is there anything else that you would recommend? And I would say that they mostly want to work at Google because they heard there's free food. So I do want to add that.
Yes. Well, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley have free food these days. So if that's your main driver, you could even look to other places as well. I think Facebook has free food. I've really enjoyed my run at Google. If I didn't like it, I would not have been employed there for 15 years. One of the things I like about it is that I've had the opportunity to change roles about every 3 years or so. If I decide, my learning curve is flattening, I want to make sure I'm still being challenged. Google makes it very easy to look around internally and find a role on another team. The food is good. I mean, I gotta say, the food is good free food, free baristas, coffee, smoothies, you name it. Really cannot complain on that front. And the thing I like most, honestly, about working at Google is my colleagues. I work with amazing, smart, well-intentioned, kind people who very much want to try to use their talents to make the world a better place. And it makes going to work every day very much a joy. So in terms of getting a job at Google, like, as you can imagine, it's pretty competitive to get a job at Google. In addition to getting some work experience, having good grades can help. Showing that you're serious about your studies and that you're taking classes that would help prepare you for a role at Google. So, for instance, I work in user experience. A lot of folks that I work with have backgrounds in HCI, human-computer interaction, or sometimes psychology, even neuropsychology. Communication is actually not quite as common, although I do know some folks at Google who have communication backgrounds. But regardless of what you study, are you bringing the best of yourself to your studies? Are you taking classes that are challenging you, that you're engaging with, where you are very much wrestling with topics related to technology and communication, and you're also developing skills that you can use, like for instance, marketing. There's a lot of younger people coming right out of college go into our marketing department. There's and including people from communication as well. So thinking about taking classes that could help set you up for a job in working in tech at a place like Google.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. I saw we have a question in the chat from Professor Kathleen Murphy. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks so much for talking with us today. I saw last year that Google Maps added a few new features, like showing where the tree canopy is and how that might relate to vulnerability in terms of climate change. And then also a chance for homeless people to have an address maker. And then another feature as far as, what was the other one? I think there was another cool one. Oh, the wildfires. So showing where wildfires are and where the danger is. How do those ideas come to be at Google, and how do you get buy-in for them? And then how have you measured whether they have generated more consumer trust? And another question is whether you've asked consumers what they love most about Google Maps.
Oh, yeah. That Google Maps has added a number of features that are very much just helping people understand and figure out the world around them, including in times of crisis. So there's actually a whole group devoted to crisis maps. And they are tasked with thinking about when bad things happen in the world, whether it's wildfires or wars or disasters, how can we help Google Maps be a tool that helps out? So it's something they're actively thinking about, and they're actually tasked with working on this. Sometimes prioritization of ideas can be a challenge. How do you know if it's more important, given limited engineering bandwidth, to do A versus B? But as much as possible, I've seen engineering teams work, all night and all weekend when there are crises and disasters to set up these tools to help people like have safe evacuation routes out of a wildfire, for instance. So there's just a tremendous amount of internal motivation to get it done. And the ideas generally just come from the world itself when there is a disaster that we think about how do we help to mitigate this as best we can. In terms of whether they've increased consumer trust, I don't know. I myself have not measured this. I would say that awareness, I would guess that amongst people who are aware of these efforts might have an increase in feeling like Google is benevolent. So there's, I said that Google is, or trust comes from competence and warmth or benevolence. So this certainly would help on the benevolence spectrum, I would guess, amongst those people who are aware, but I've not actually tested that one. And then as to your last question, what do consumers love most about Google Maps? Usually the most common answer I hear is that you help me get from A to B easily, and I in a very efficient and predictable way. So that very much speaks to the competence part of the job, just doing your job really well.
I think we could squeeze in one last question. Someone has one they would like to ask. I think, Dr. Henderson, I remember when we were first talking about this event, and you shared, that one of the things that also brought you to Google initially was to have a sense of community in the workplace, that the kind of research you do in a team with others, versus other environments where someone can do similar types of research, but it, might be more solitary, right? And so, I just remembered that was another aspect that you said you enjoy about where you work. Although the past 2 years, I know a lot of people have been remote, so it's a little bit different. But no other questions? Okay, well, then we can end here. And I want to thank Dr. Vani Henderson so much for being here with us today. Thank you to Lillian Lodge Copenhagen, the Copenhagen Center at FIU, our colleagues at the other centers, and all of you who are able to join us. So thank you so much. And we look forward to many more exciting opportunities and events with all of you.